Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our very first election interview. That's right, it's election season. We have our primaries coming up August the 18th, and that effectively works as I would say the general election for us. Our school board elections, most of the everything from state house to county commissioner basically gets decided there in Okaloosa and Walton counties. So with me today, I have Gordon Porter. Gordon is running for school board in Walton County for District 3. So welcome to the show. And would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, no, appreciate you having me. I'm excited about the interview. So I'm a Walton County native. I've lived there my entire life. In fact, going back as far as my great great grandparents, we have lived in specifically DeFuniak Springs for many many years. I attended high school in Paxton in Walton County, so the north end of the county. So very familiar with the county in general, but also the very agrarian side as well on the north end. I think we had maybe 45 or 47 kids in our graduating class. So it was a very small bunch, tight knit bunch. But um, after high school, went and received a degree in golf course operations over in Lake City at Florida Gateway College. And did spend some time doing that, and then received some training and things like that, and switched industries actually. And so I'm in project management now, and I've worked in the construction industry as a project manager for a little over 6 years, and serve as the senior project manager for BECI in Destin.
Okay, very good. And so, first questions is kind of a pet peeve of mine. There is no live stream to watch the Walton County Board, school board, do
Yes.
their business. If you were to win this election, would you make a motion to get a live stream so that everybody, all of us nerds at home, can watch it?
Absolutely. The fact that we don't have one is a little bit archaic, I think, in the day and age that we live. And I understand that the meetings aren't held, in the same, venue every time. But nevertheless, we have certainly have the IT support, and I think there's a good opportunity there for even bringing in some of our IT classes that are taught through the county to help make that happen. So. Absolutely, they should be live streamed, and they're honestly one of the few in the neighboring counties and even in our own county that aren't live streamed. So absolutely, that would be one of the first things I would like to see change.
So, if you could ask anybody, or if you could talk to every neighbor at once and tell them what your platform is, what do you say you're focused on for this election?
Absolutely. So honestly, my biggest platform, my background is obviously not education. I'm not an educator. However, I do think that there's a difference in being a school board member, an administrator, and a teacher. They are two very distinct roles. We have to have teachers. We have to have them, be at the top of their game, and that is something that I am not as a teacher. But what I am, and what I pride myself in and doing well, is being able to manage large sums of money and move things around. So as far as my platform goes, though, ideologically, I think that our country is at a turning point right now. We are, I think, in one of the most conflicted times in our history, with a few very specific examples. And so I think right now we are not at a point where we can afford ambiguity when it comes to ideology. When we can't afford fence straddling, your candidate for school board has to be very clear in where they are ideologically. And if the county, doesn't align with me there, then fine. But I don't think that's the case. We are not at a point where we can have gatekeepers, which that's really what the school board members are gatekeepers ideologically, academically. I don't believe we can afford at this point in our history to be mealy mouthed or ride the fence or try to stay apolitical. I understand the desire to do that, and specifically in the classroom, I think you have to maintain an air of apoliticalness, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter what you're doing, especially in this day and age. What you say in the classroom is going to be taken in a political context. And so, for that reason, I don't think the administration is in a position to play both sides of the fence. You have to take a steady approach. And, it's been said before, any organization that is not, ardently protecting American values and has an America first worldview, it is going to drift the wrong way. It never works the opposite. We see that even in our Supreme Court. If somebody is, approved and put on the bench, almost never do they drift more towards an American worldview, a Christian worldview. They always tend to drift the other direction, and I think that the school board is no exception to that. So in a nutshell, in a very tight nutshell, that's my platform. Is I'm here as an advocate for the student and for the parent and for the teacher. We don't teachers a lot of times get a bad rap for being for being of a liberal mindset or of being of an anti-Christian mindset. And I know many of the teachers in Walton County, and I can say that nothing could be further than the truth for them in that regard. And so my goal is to be an advocate for that worldview on our school board.
Okay, and so just so I can like get the specifics of how your platform works, like what are
Sure.
you seeing as stuff that needs to be changed or needs to be adjusted in order to be America first? Like, what does America first mean? Can you kind of like spread that out for me and
Of
give me
course.
specific examples?
Absolutely, it's become a very broad term as of the last year or 18 months. So I completely understand the ambiguity there. So yeah, my platform, I would start off with taking a hard look at our curriculum, specifically as it relates to American history, specifically as it relates to mathematics, as it relates to science, and take an honest look at that. Not just as is it approved by somebody in Tallahassee with a master's or a doctorate degree, but is it the best thing for our students? Is it the best thing? Are they equipped to go to an Ivy League school and come out with their worldview that their parents gave them intact? So I think the first look has to be at curriculum, but also on the administrative side of things, we have to be sure that we're being careful with what our policies are as administration. So just as recently as November, December timeframe, there were we had DEI policies that were publicly posted on the administration's website. They were directly linked to the Southern Poverty Law Center. They had, an organization under their umbrella had written the policy for our school board. And listen, do I think that the school board even knew about that? No, I don't. And that's precisely the problem. And I think that's the kind of thing we have to be looking into and being careful about. Is unfortunately, conservative and Christian ideas don't slip under the door. That's not the way it works. The opposite is true, though, where more liberal left wing ideology, it does happen to slip under the door. And over time, it has a granular effect where it slowly but surely changes the worldview of not only those teaching, but more importantly, our students that are shaping our future.
So I wanted to ask this question a little bit later, but I think it speaks right to this. On March 24th, there was a social media post you put out about returning prayer to Walton County schools.
Absolutely.
And my question is, for example, how do we decide which prayers? So, for
Sure.
example, would you be okay with like like a Muslim imam coming and giving a prayer? Would you be okay with me as a Roman Catholic saying a rosary over the PA system? I mean, where is that line, and how do you determine who gets to pray and who doesn't?
I think that's a very fair question, and one that I did get some honest feedback from on that post. And I think what you have to defer back to is, what did our country look like for the past, 250 years? This year's our 250th anniversary. It's interesting to me that for 200 years before 1965, there was no question as to what was allowed in school. What our public education system should look like, the direction we should be heading. America is it is founded on Christianity. Christian principles are all through our documents. If you look through the handwritten letters that a lot of our founders wrote, not just the ones that we see in the Smithsonian, but between each other, a lot of those are in private hands now. But there's no doubt that they were Christian, God-fearing men. What I will say is I don't necessarily agree with splitting hairs across denominations in the Christian world. What I will say, though, is when it comes to the Muslim faith, things like that, it does not align with American values. It is antithesis to what America was founded on, what it stands for. And so understanding that in a government setting, you have to be careful with First Amendment policies, and you have to be careful in that regard. My grander point with that post was to say that the omission of God out of our worldview, out of our curriculum, out of our day. I mean, just you being a Catholic know this well. God being at the center of your faith, Christ being at the center of your faith, it does affect your worldview. It should. That's the whole point, is it's to affect your worldview. And so if you omit that out of something as important as education, it's a big swing and a miss. And so, in my point of view, that's where I would draw the line. I'm not going to get into splitting hairs with denominations, whether that's Baptist, Methodist, whatever, Catholic. What I will say is we have to make sure that we are guiding our children in a way that our country was intended to be founded upon, and where it was intended to go.
So, would there be like in your perfect world, right? Would there be like religion classes taught in Walton County schools?
Yeah, I think theology. That was. If you go back again, forgive me for I'm very interested in history. So going back into how things were done in the past is just part of who I am. Um, People often get a bad give the Bible in classrooms a bad rap. But if you go back and look at something as recently as the 1930s, okay, that's not that long ago. It's less than 100 years ago. The Bible was one of our primary textbooks. Isaac Watts' hymnals was one of our primary textbooks. That's how we learned to read. McGuffey's readers, they had Christian principles through those things. And so, as specifically as it relates to theology classes and things like that in the school, absolutely. I think it certainly would need to come from a place of you have people who are well qualified to educate on that subject. But yeah, absolutely. That's a critical part. I don't think it should take the place of a local church, and I don't think it should take the place of the influence of the parents. But teaching the Bible, not so much teaching a perspective on the Bible, but just teaching the Bible as a governing book, as a part of our culture. Absolutely, it should be taught in schools.
So, and pardon me for belaboring the point.
No, that's okay.
The question I have is, some people teach the Bible as like a historical document, and some people might see it as a philosophical document. Are
Sure.
you arguing, just so I'm clear, are you arguing that like we should be teaching the religion of Christianity in the school system?
No. So I think what you're driving at is there's two different ways to see the Bible, I guess, maybe. The Bible being interwoven in our education is more what I'm driving at, not from an ideological or religious perspective, but
Okay.
more so that's, teaching kids how to read, based off of that. Using it as a tool to educate, not as, driving kids to a specific denomination or driving kids to a specific religion, but bringing that in as part of our culture again. That was a part of our culture for centuries, and it's been lacking the last 50 years, 60 years, and the evidence of that is rising suicide rates among teens and even middle schoolers, young teens and even single digit ages. We've seen rampant depression. We've seen drug abuse, and all of that directly corresponds with a lack of prayer being taken out of schools in 1962, and it also it directly correlates with the Bible being pulled out of our classrooms.
So, last question on this.
Sure.
If there is a lawsuit that's filed, what's the next step for the school board? Because this seems like something that could quickly become litigious
Sure.
for people that would dissent from this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something I've given a lot of thought to. And to be honest with you, Chris, I think a good example of how to approach this actually came out of Mississippi with the overturning of Roe versus Wade. The way they approached that was not they weren't suing the government for allowing abortions because that wasn't the case. It was a case law that was overturned. It was not the law of the land. It was case law. There is no law on the books. One could argue the First Amendment protects a lot of that, and it does. But what it does not do is it does not prohibit the Bible from being in the classrooms. That is bad case law that has been pushed to the nth degree. That is the definition of progressivism. And so, if legal action comes, again, important thing to consider here too is, Chris, I'm one of five people. If I'm on the board, the odds of this actually happening, and I'm well aware of this, and I'm smart enough to know that I'm one person, likely not going to be anything that I'm going to put on the table is going to be up for debate. It may not even pass. If it were to pass, and we have the majority of the board agree with me on this, it is possible that we do have some legal attacks there. What I will say is, with the Supreme Court that we currently have in the state of Florida, excuse me, the Supreme Court we currently have federally, I believe that it's going to trend the right way for the First Amendment.
Got it. Moving on to like more brass tacks, money, project management, kind of your wheelhouse. I'm
Yeah,
very interested. First thing, as we all know, the cost of gas has gone up in the last couple of months due to the Iran war.
I drive a
Uh,
diesel. I'm well aware.
okay, so you're familiar with the situation.
Yeah.
That for large organizations like a school district, that can have a real effect on the bottom line because
Yes.
you're using probably tens of thousands of gallons of gas a year, right?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so I'm curious, as a policymaker and a budget maker on the school board, how would you deal with this issue? Would you rob Peter to pay Paul, for lack of a better term, or would you raise taxes, or what does this look like to deal with this situation?
Sure. So something like a commodity like gas, diesel, whatever, there's only so much planning you can do there. The best that you can do is have a contingency. We can look at historical records over the past 20 or 30 years and kind of get a gauge of the range that it's going to fall in and plan for the worst case scenario. I think that's the way you have to approach a situation like this. It's not something where you can, gas prices fluctuate so much. You can't just raise a tax and solve the problem that way. You have to plan for it, and you have to be proactive, not reactive. And unfortunately, government by its nature can be a bit reactive. And I'm hoping that that's a bit of insight that I can bring to the board as being a bit proactive in those regards and not so reactive.
Another thing about you being a project manager that I see as an interesting question to ask is that the district is on I don't want to say a building spree because that makes it sound like
Yeah,
they're going nuts, but they're building a lot of stuff.
they
I
are.
mean, the county is expanding, the population is growing pretty quickly, and there's a lot to be built or has recently been built.
Yes.
With all that said, what could you bring to the table? What are you seeing in these projects that are being built that you might change or might do differently because of your expertise?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And it's a big question because there's a lot that's involved with a large scale commercial project like that. Currently, the price to build a school right now in Walton County specifically is somewhere between $350 and $450 a square foot, which is unbelievable. That's a really big price tag. Now they're built like fortresses. I mean, they're concrete buildings. They have a lot of security systems, things like that. So I understand it's not going to be the same cost per square foot to build a single family home, and that's not what I'm driving at. My bigger concern is again, there's a couple different facets to this, but primarily where my project management skills lie are on the design side of things. So
Okay.
before there is some during the actual construction, but for the most part, my job is to look at the design and to make sure the design is done well. That is, if you will, the quarterback of the whole program. If the design's not right, it's going to cost you in the long run, either during the project or after the project. You're going to have costs associated. Typically, what happens is we have a political deadline, a political timeline set by the school board. And so whenever a contractor, is bidding the project, they tell you the duration that the project's going to take. What you cannot do is take that preliminary schedule to the public and say, hey, we're going to be opening by this date. And when you do that, you're never ahead of schedule until you finish the project.
Yeah.
And so because of that, there's a rush to get it done. Things get missed, corners get cut, which inevitably turns into either change orders or it turns into post CO, post certificate of occupancy. You have issues, you have leaks, you have air intrusion issues, you have things where you have to shift kids around and put them in portable buildings. These are all things that Walton County is familiar with and has dealt with for, quite honestly, decades. And so there's a whole lot to that, Chris, but really where you could save a lot of cost is just making sure that somebody on the board is familiar enough with the construction design, and we're not relying on third-party consultants, which are important, but you cannot rely. Recommendation power and decision-making power are two very different things. A consultant can recommend all day long, but the board has to make a decision. And so bringing some of that expertise to the board, not only in the design side, but actually going through the project and, when issues arise, when changes arise, whether or not the county has to pay for that, somebody on the board has to have a decent set of eyes to be able to look at what's being presented from the architect, from the contractor, and make sure that everything is, above board. I don't have any questions of our current contractors or architects that we work with as far as their, being above board. More so just having that third party set of eyes on the actual people that are making the decision for the county, and having a fresh set of eyes to be able to look at what's being presented and say, yes, that makes sense. That's the best for the taxpayer. That's the best for the student, for the teacher, versus, either that's lavish or there's a giant hole in our design here that's going to cost us a lot of money. That perspective on the board, I think, is going to do a lot to help save some costs there.
All right, and so last and probably the most important question I'm going to ask you, Walton has, their first football game, kickoff classic, Gulf Breeze, August 14th, but then they have West Florida Tech, Arnold, Taylor County, Fort Walton Beach, Freeport, South Walton, Destin, Jay, Catholic, and Central. Do they win 8 games this year?
That's a big question. I hope for the best. I think we have good programs all the way through the county. We have a lot of different programs. In fact, I think we just had a girls program. I think it was cross country, or maybe it was a track and field that won state, which, hey, congratulations to them. One thing that Walton County is not bad at is athletics. And so, do we win 8 games? Hopefully, we're rooting for that. But if we can do that, I think we're going to be naming some buildings after some coaches.
All right, very good. Well, Sir Gordon Porter, he is running for School Board District 3 in Walton County. Thank you so much for coming on today, and we look forward to your campaign. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I appreciate the time.